I was asked to tell you something about the period that I served with the Congress and our efforts in getting prevention research and strategies into legislation and ultimately with an aim to get it into law. Even though I'm going to tell you about my experiences, I'm hesitant to take much credit for them because, as you've heard, I had the great opportunity and fortune to work for Congressman John Conyers and Congressman Bobby Scott in the almost 20 years I was here on the Hill, and so you saw their dedication to prevention science, and so my work was pretty easy considering that I was working for them. So my job was to help them in pulling together what really is an army out there of advocates and experts. You've heard some of them here, whether it's in legislation or not. Our agencies often are our strongest advocates for, and certainly give us the basis for why we should insist on research and evidence in policies in the Congress and in the efforts that we try to do in passing laws. So much of what I was tasked to do was to tap into and empower that advocacy out there and to bring it into play to be sure to get science and best evidence there. And what we found was that even though it was difficult at times, not all members are like Conyers, Scott, and Congressman Young that you heard from, but even those who are not there can be persuaded. And this is across party lines. If you persist and you seek to do so with the people out there who want to see that come about. For example, in 2002, Congressman Scott was the chief Democratic co-sponsor for both the Juvenile Accountability Block Grant as well as the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act REOF bills. Democrats were in the minority. And whether you're in the minority or majority, it's difficult to get legislation passed unless you have a bipartisan coalition and effort to do so. So even in the minority, Scott was able to lead the effort to get these important bills reauthorized, both of which included significant emphasis on prevention and on research, science, evaluation, technical assistance, training, and monitoring. We also did that on a strong bipartisan basis with the Second Chance Act, which insists on evidence-based approaches in the use of federal funds. And so whether you're in the majority or minority, the task is the same: to work across parties on a bipartisan basis and to use the army out there that's available to support you as staffers or others who want to know who to work with in this regard. You now have an advantage I don't have I didn't have when I was working, of Denny and Neil that you can go to, and they can tell you everybody you need to work with. But in my years on the Hill and working for people like Bobby Scott and Conyers, they've become a magnet for people who want to make sure that we're doing the best we can for children and families in the U.S., and they know that that's through science and advocacy on prevention. And so they came to us and helped us to work on those plans. And so in 2007, when Democrats again gained the majority after 12 years in the minority, we felt this was an excellent opportunity to try to make a major push for getting prevention science into legislation on a significant basis. Our goal was to have it established as the preeminent focus for standard for addressing crime, prevention based on evidence through early intervention and through prevention, primary prevention, and early intervention. We started the process in a deliberate manner by scheduling a series of hearings and briefings on preventing youth violence and crime. And so by June of 2007, we had pulled together, under Congressman Scott and Congressman Conyers' leadership, a two-day summit on preventing violence and crime, youth violence and crime, where we called together over 40 criminal and juvenile justice researchers, administrators, judges, prosecutors, other law enforcement officials, child advocates, members of Congress, both Republican and Democrat, and people from all political facets, liberals, conservatives, moderates, libertarians, to tell us what was effective, what the research and evidence shows was effective in preventing youth violence and crime. Our goal was to change what the Children's Defense Fund had identified as a cradle-to-prison pipeline that many of our children found themselves born on into what we define as a cradle-to-college or the workforce pipeline by using prevention and early intervention. In putting this summit of over 40 people together after we'd had a series of briefings and hearings that identified some of the principles that we needed to consider, and what I did was to get in touch with many of the advocates from the agencies in the federal government, from the private sector, to identify for me the people out there who were the experts, some of the most accomplished and learned people who were credible researchers, scholars, advocates, whose works these advocates I was talking to were familiar with, to call them as witnesses, and that's what we were able to do. So all told, we had, by the end of our process, over 50 experts from all the various fields I mentioned to tell us how best to prevent crime and violence. As you might suspect, not one of the witnesses, whether law enforcement, conservative, or otherwise, called for what usually you hear when you're trying to deal with crime. None called for more penalties or harsher treatments for juveniles, but focus on science and what had been proven to address effectively and in a cost-effective manner youth violence and crime. And in pointing it out, again, we have law enforcement officials, prosecutors, judges, police. They pointed out that it's not an either-or situation. You don't stop responding to crime, and you still have to, when someone calls about a crime, you still need police and the traditional approaches, but it's a both and. So while you're continuing to respond to crime as it occurs, you want to go upstream and try to stop the flood from getting bigger. And so that's where prevention science comes in. And one of the things we pointed out or learned from what the speakers were saying is that there's a marginal issue here relative to where you're going to spend your next dollar. We have plenty, and this is coming from law enforcement, we have plenty of mechanisms for addressing and responding to crime after the fact. Every state has all the penalties, all the enforcement mechanisms they need to make sure if there's a serious crime committed, they can respond to it. The federal government has more. So if you're looking at addressing crime, and you've got a limited amount of dollars, do you add more dollars to this heavy buildup that you had? We had one instance where the Justice Department filed charges against someone for a terrorist act, and they had over 230 some separate counts. The jury found the person guilty of one count and sentenced them to life in prison. I think that was a message. We didn't need all of that, but it just reflects that there's plenty to work with if what you want to do is impose law enforcement approaches. So if you're going to spend the next dollar, where should it be spent? And that's where the science and the research comes in, that you don't need to add to this mountain because it's only, I mean, you can only sentence a person to so many life sentences. And so clearly the evidence shows that the most effective way to get value out of the next dollar spent is to spend it on what science and evidence tells you will have an impact. So this is what we came up with, and we were ready to develop our principles and policies and put them into legislative language, but we ran into a little hiccup along the way, and you're going to always have pitfalls. While we were doing this deliberate process, we learned that the bill had just unanimously passed the Senate that emphasized exactly the opposite. More harsh federal penalties, expanding gang databases so that you know, every kid who's stopped, even for a traffic offense, becomes a gangbanger, and it's a gang crime because they're in a gang database. And so we made it very clear to leadership that we're not in support of that. And whenever I say we, I'm talking not only about our members, but about this body of advocates out there who know what's helpful and useful and who are working with us all the time. And the problem was this bill had passed, and now it's at the House, and there are members who are pro-law enforcement and who, you know, feel, as Congressman Scott was saying, that you can get quick return on, you know, the good soundbite of tough on crime, so they're ready to go. But we were able to persuade leadership to give us a chance to do something. They made it clear to us you can't just be opposed to something, you got to have something that members can be for. So we quickly got with Office of Legislative Counsel, that any of you who work here know very well about, to help translate what we had come up with as principles, such as evidence-based or promising before federal money can be spent on, promising that it shows promise to be scientifically validated as some standards that would be applied, and we were able to get them to put it into legislative language. So, you know, those of you who want to get something started, don't worry that you don't have the language that you need for what you're trying to do, because that's the job of the councils, and they will tell you they can work better if you don't give them language that they have to dismiss. Just tell them what you're trying to accomplish, and they will work with you. You're going to find that there is a prioritization. They're going to give priority to the majority party at the committee level that has to bring forth, has a job of initiating legislative concerns, and then to the minority at the committee level who has to respond, but you can get your turn wherever you are, and eventually get them to work with you to develop legislation. And as you saw from Congressman Young, he's on Ways and Means, and you know, these areas might not all fall deeply into committee, but you can get your legislation put together and begin to work with the advocates who are there to help you. They will not only tell you who you need to call, who is going to be with you, how much support you can get, help you put it together, tell you who's going to be opposed, who's not going to work with you. And the good thing about it, you know, I could call off some names of organizations and I'd leave out more than I'd call off, but it's not hard. As I say, you have Denny and Neil now, but the good thing about the advocacy community out there, the agencies included, is if you call any one of them, they're all going to be singing the same tune. They know who's good at what and who you need to talk to accomplish what your boss wants to accomplish relative to progressive, effective legislative interests based on science and credible evidence, as opposed to the kind of stuff we've all seen all too much of over the years. So you just want to work with the folks who know what's out there. As I say, I feel bad even taking credit for a lot of this, because so much of it was provided by those who are the real experts. But you can be a vehicle for that expertise. Advocates want to see legislative policy. Great thing about what you're hearing from the agencies is they don't just wait for it to come from the legislature. If they get an opportunity to set standards that are based on science and evidence, they'll do that anyway, because they are experts and they know that that's what's required. But when you can get it in the legislation and they have the clout to be able to institute it as a policy, as a requirement, that's going to be helpful as well. So this is just one example in how we put together the Youth Promise Act, which is what the legislation we were developing was eventually named by one of our staffers. And if you don't know, that stands for the acronym for youth, for promise, and youth promises: prison reduction through opportunities, mentoring, intervention, support, and education, or YPA. Which is legislation that's still out there that we're seeking to pass with a coalition of over 300 organizations and officials at all levels of government advocating for it. Going on with the 2009 and 2011 cases that eliminated life without parole sentences for juveniles where there was no consideration of their youth and circumstances, such as mandated life, and I think that will continue. I think when courts deal with 75 or 100-year sentences, the equivalent of life, they're going to reach the same conclusion, that there's no difference in that kind of sentence and a life sentence. And then you're going to be faced with, now wait a minute, if a person who is serving a life sentence gets a parole consideration in 15 years, what about a person who's serving a 20-year sentence? Is it fair that that person that's likely in for a lesser crime gets no consideration? So I think we're going to eventually, if states and the federal government don't move to it themselves, have a court jurisprudence that's going to say you've got to give kids fair considerations, and I think that that's got to happen, and let's hope I'm proven sooner rather than later. Our motto in all of this, because you work on it Congress after Congress, year after year, you can't expect quick results, is when we're fighting for what's right and justified, we never lose. It just takes us a little longer to win sometimes.